Crashing displayed.
With no survivors. They expect one of us in the wreckage, brother.
Have we started the fire?
Yes. The fire rises. Calm down, Doctor. Now is not the time for fear. That comes later.
Hey folks, hopefully you enjoyed that little skit. This video is about Season 4, because obviously that is now on the horizon. We have a release date for it, being the week of 2nd or 3rd of August. So it's very rapidly approaching, which means we are going to get a lot more information. Also, interestingly enough, there has been another patch pushed onto the PTR, and that is essentially 9.2.7. So there's going to be a few tweaks, few changes, and in the coming days and weeks, we're probably going to get a lot of information about hotfixes, changes, and where they want to take the classes. So this is a bit of preemptive speculation, and we're going to go through things on the PTR, my thoughts, processes, stuff like that, and kind of how I'm going to be planning for the next week or next couple of weeks of Tumult, because obviously we had the destruction nerf scare that has now been confirmed to be going through in Season 4. So we've got about a month of current destruction left. So without any further delay, let's get into the video. So, starting with the destruction changes, we are currently on the PTR because we're going to go into other vendor stuff and through dungeon drops and what I think might become a prevailing spec, or what might work and what won't. So to start with then, for those of you that don't know, one of the upcoming nerfs is going to be a change to how Reign of Chaos interacts with our set. So our tier bonus as it is, every 10 shards we spend gives us grants Ritual of Ruin, which makes our next Chaos Pulse or Reign of Fire consume no shards and have no cast time, which in turn with the set then procs a Blasphemy Infernal. Now previously, the Blasphemy Infernal has interacted with Reign of Chaos, so you've been able to extend the talent beyond that. Unfortunately, this is no longer going to be the case, which means that Reign of Chaos is now solely going to be tied to our Infernal, 3 or 2 minute Infernal respectively, depending on whether or not you're using Wilfrids. Now, this is kind of going to change a lot of how our damage profile works, and there are warlocks that have already been playing around with cancel aura macros for Reign of Chaos. So it's not a the sky is falling Mayday situation like in my skit with the upcoming nerfs. but it does massively hamper our DPS. We're looking at somewhere between a 1200-ish to maybe 1000 DPS loss in single target situations, even with the single target buffs that we're getting to quote unquote compensate for it. And when you start getting into large AoE situations, some of the sims were pulling, you're losing 20, 30, 40k DPS over the course of sustained large AoE fights, which is kind of Warlock's damage profile. So what do we suspect that, how are things going to change? Well, realistically, what we might start seeing is actually a change in legendaries, specifically in single target situations. So if we pull up the loots and legendaries again, at the moment, for single target, people are running Madness of the Ashikia. Now, it's a great legendary and still may have its place. However, there's a very good likelihood that people are going to start moving to Embers of Diabolic Raiment, because one of the big parts of having Infernal, or the Blasphemy Infernal with Reign of Chaos, is this constant feeding into shards, spending shards, getting more shard generation back because you're spawning more Infernals and things like this. And that's not going to change outside of your main burst windows. You're still going to be, pumping Infernals into the target and doing a considerable amount of damage. The problem is, though, outside of that. So Embers has always been, throughout this entire tier, has been a good legendary second to Madness. And it is probably going to end up taking the forefront when we end up transitioning into the next season. And there is a case to be made for Cinders, specifically Necrolord Cinders, where you'll probably end up seeing a build very much akin to Roaring Blaze and then Dark Soul Instability. So you'll see a build similar to this from a raiding setting. Now, once Season 4 hits, there is going to be a bit of period where we're testing, because I suspect we may start seeing something akin to like Cataclysm, Reign of Chaos, and Channel Demon Fire as a build, or maybe even Fire and Brimstone rather than Inferno, because you can get a lot of shard generation out of that, which will essentially combat the current issue that we have. But honestly, I think in terms of Mythic Plus, especially pushing Mythic Plus, we're likely to start moving towards Demonology for Fortified weeks and potentially Affliction for Tyrannical weeks. Now, I can hear you going at me. Hold up. The buffs to Affliction are kind of being slept on. The single target damage Affliction is now capable of, especially Necrolord Affliction, is huge. I personally am simming nearly 16k for Affliction single target now, and my Demonology in comparison is simming 15.5. There's about a 400 DPS difference. Actually, if I pull up Discord momentarily, I will read out the values, because this sparked a huge conversation in our Warlock channel. So, for the fight that I was doing, I made the mistake of simming heavy movement, but it was 12.5 versus 12.8. And that was the heavy movement for one of the fights that we were playing around with. And that was in favor of Affliction. And then pure single target, it goes even further. Now, in particular, because we're going into a fated season and a Timewalking season, where loot is going to be a little bit different. If we go to Balfour Azeroth, there is a staff here that, if you're not going to use fated tokens, and we'll discuss that in a moment, is a 45-second cooldown int amp. You zap yourself for nature damage, and we're very likely to get this. I'm not entirely sure how the punch cards are going to be used in relation to Mechagon, whether we're still going to get the punch cards at a much higher item level. On the PTR, it's not really showing anything. But or if we're just going to get, actual trinkets, I suspect it's probably still going to be the punch cards, which means hopefully you've got your old trinket from BFA, or they'll give us a new one. But the weapon is on a 45-second cooldown. Now, for Necrolord Affliction specifically, this is fantastic because both Decimating Bolt and Phantom Singularity are both 45-second cooldowns, which means that every time you Phantom Singularity and Decimating Bolt going into these large drain soul windows, you're going to have extra intellect as you kind of go into this. It does mean that you're going to be pushing your Dark Soul Misery and your Dark Lair back by about 20 seconds. So you're going to end up with like a 220 breakdown rather than a 2-minute breakdown. But for single target fights, so Skolex, Halondrus, Castle Nathriel weeks, and potentially some fights within Sanctum of Domination, because remember, with it being fated, we now have all 3 raids to contend with. Currently, it is a Castle Nathriel week on the PTR, but fights like Shriekwing, Hungering Destroyer, possibly Anerva, Sludgefist, maybe even Stone Legion Generals, you might see really, really strong use playing Necrolord Affliction. Maybe even Huntsmaster if you can avoid necessarily having to move, because remember there are the damage amp phases within that, where he takes increased damage, which is always good. Now, that 45-second window and stuff, and weapons, going into weapons, is going to be very dependent on these 3 vendors and how lucky you are, because at the moment, the way these fated vendors work is you're going to do a raid quest line, and you can earn a total of 3 throughout the season, 3 tokens throughout the season, which means that you can buy 3 items. This is supposed to be like your bad luck protection stuff. So you've got Sepulchre of the First One loot, First Sigil, Rygalon's Antumbra, Shadows of the Cosmos Blade, Jailer's Offhand. You've then got the 2-handed staff from, I believe, Kel'Thuzad, which depends on where your luck is. Like, realistically, I suspect you're probably going to want to try and spend them on things like Cabal's Hymnal and, you know, maybe Shadow of the Cosmos, perhaps. But I suspect generally this is where you're going to pick your trinkets up, because we're not going to have Ruby, we're not going to have RQD, we're not going to have Changeling. There is a haste trinket available, pure haste trinket, and if we go to dungeons, Warlords of Draenor, Grimrail Depot, I believe it's Grimrail. Nope, that's the mastery stat stick, which means it's Iron Docks. There we are. So you do have a 2-minute haste trinket that's going to be available to us. But I don't know if that's going to hold up compared to the raid trinkets, and whether or not, from a Warlock sim perspective, because obviously the sims aren't out yet, this is entirely speculation, but I suspect we're probably going to be looking, depending on your RNG loot-wise, you're going to be looking at spending your puzzling cartel dinars, your little mystery coins, on covering your trinket spots, which means that depending on how lucky you are, you may or may not be able to get the weapons, because again, when you look at the fated loot, Shadowlands, Castle Nathria, and if we set it to Mythic, it's the highest item level will be Nathrius, there, 311, and you will be able to upgrade the items that you buy from this vendor up to 311 as you progress through this. So this is kind of your bad luck protection, as it were, but you will probably be spending it on trinkets. Let's be honest. So we've talked a little bit about the gear, a little bit about the nerfs, and now we're going to talk about my plans and how I'm going to prepare for Season 4 and the changes it's inevitably going to bring. The first thing I'm going to do, if we swap back to the main screen, is I am going to try playing with Affliction a bit, especially in single target settings. We're going to play around with this particular build for Necrolord, Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Dark Pact, Phantom. You can play around with the 40 talents to your choosing. Shadow's Embrace and Dark Soul Misery. The reason Shadow Embrace over Horns, and it's been mentioned a few times, is although Horns is a 1% damage increase more, it comes at a 1.2 to a 1 second cast time, depending on the amount of haste you've got. And when you're playing, especially when you're playing Necrolord with Malefic Wrath, you really don't want to be casting anything you don't have to be. So having Horned, it becomes a little bit harder to juggle as opposed to Shadow Embrace, which you just have passively because it's Drain Soul. Now, with the tier sets in existence for Affliction Warlock, maintaining Malefic Wrath, the legendary Malefic Wrath, is much easier. Now, if we go to legendaries, for those of you that don't play Affliction, Malefic Wrath, Malefic Rapture increases the damage of your Drain Soul by 35% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, capping out at 105%, which really, really nice. Especially when you consider that while Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction are active, your Drain Soul has a 20% chance to make your next Malefic Rapture cost no shards and be cast instantly. Which basically means that there's a very, very high uptime as you go through your rotation passively that you can maintain Malefic Wrath at 3 stacks. And if, for whatever reason, it does drop off, usually you end up in a situation where you have banked shards anyway, so you can get Malefic Wrath back very quickly. It's not as hard to maintain as it was in previous seasons. Now, I'm probably going to try and play around as well with Wrath of Consumption in AoE and Mythic Plus, assuming I can get a group going, because as you guys know at the moment, I've kind of been hodgepodging between groups and stuff. So that is kind of the Affliction plan, because I suspect Affliction is very much going to be the dark horse. However, for Destruction specifically, what we're going to do is we're going to work to craft an Embers of the Diabolic Raiment, and we're going to play around with it. I suspect for Mythic Plus, we're still going to be looking at playing with Wilfred's, and if I just quickly swap talents as well while we do this, we're still probably going to be looking at a combination of Wilfred's, and we're probably going to see a talent build similar to this with Wilfred's. We may keep Infernal. I doubt it though, because Fire and Brimstone is going to give you more shards consistently over the course of a dungeon, because you've got to remember where Infernal's already been nerfed. And if we're losing Reign of Chaos, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have to capitalize very much on our Summon Infernal. Now, with Wilfred's, we can get that down to a 2-minute cooldown, roughly, which is going to line up with Dark Soul Instability, so you can very much capitalize on having that 2-minute burst window. But if that isn't quite how people want to play, you know, meta shifts going from season to season. We have different dungeons and the hidden Dreadlord affix that we've got and how that works. It may be a case of we start playing a Fires build, which could see something like this. Now, a Roaring Blaze Channel Demon Fire build is a little bit edgy, because it does force you, oh, I say edgy, sketchy. Nah, edgy is something completely different, don't go there. Roaring Blaze is primarily a single target talent. However, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be leveraging Havoc and the extra conflict charge that you get from Cinders of the Ashikia to be able to apply Roaring Blaze to multiple targets quickly. Because you've got to remember the buffs that we're getting for single target are fire-based buffs, which is why it's aiding Necrolord so much, because Decimating Bolt increases Incinerate damage, which further feeds into the fact that it's getting a base buff anyway. So your Immolates are going to be hitting exceptionally hard in a Necrolord build. But in Mythic Plus, what this does is this is going to change your damage profile into essentially a 30-ish second burst profile. Whereas having Fire and Brimstone rather than Cataclysm means that you're consistently going to have a lot of high fire damage, which means that you could probably move away from using Cinders, potentially, keep Reign of Chaos, and have Wilfrids. But I suspect if you're going to go Fire and Brimstone, keep Wilfrids, you're going to want Dark Soul instability and double down on the 2-minute cooldowns. But we're going to see all of this played around with in the coming days and weeks, especially if I can find a good group that's willing to do some proper testing with me. So, something to look forward to there. Other plans, though, obviously with Season 4 very much on the horizon, that does mean we're also going to end up with more Dragonflight information in the near future, hopefully, because Dragonflight ain't that far away, really. We now, at the end of June, or as I'm recording this, we've literally just gone over into the 1st of July. So we're in month 7 out of 12. There's now 5 months to go until Dragonflight has to be released, unless they're going to somehow delay it. What this does mean as well is they've already turned around and said that Season 4 is going to be a much shorter season. So in the coming weeks and months, you guys are also going to start seeing my plans for Dragonflight, how we're going to tackle it, because let's face it, my plans for Shadowlands have not pulled it through anywhere close to how I wanted them. So we're going to try and build with a bit more redundancy in mind going forward. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions, please do comment below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. In the meantime, hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful evening wherever you are in the world. Catch you later, folks. Have a good one.